Dune is a hard book for me to review. I actually still can't tell if I enjoyed it or hated it, or thought it was boring, or thought it was interesting. It's really hard for me to kind of put into words what I thought of it. And I think part of it is because it's kind of doing a whole bunch of different things at once. It's I would compare it to epic fantasy, I guess it's called epic sci-fi. So many different little like plot lines and intricacies and styles of storytelling and the thing is split into three books. I mean, even overtly. So it's very hard to kind of get a sense of of what's going on. This will be a spoiler-free review because the idea of summarizing the plot sort of causes me pain. Um, but I think just the kind of like spoiler-free summary is I didn't enjoy this book. I found it, I don't know, I found it grating to read, or I listened to it, but grating to listen to, and what by that I mean, there's no characters that like really grab me in the sense that I care about them or invested in them. Every character feels like an agent, if that makes sense. They feel like a how like physical objects can do things, right? For example, a tectonic plate might move because of forces underneath it, right, or whatever. But you don't feel any empathy or anything for a tectonic plate, even though it's taking actions, but it doesn't have agency. It's just a fucking pile of rocks. And even though it might be a highly nuanced, complex, and interesting pile of rocks, to try and relate to it is impossible. And I don't know, this might be a shitty analogy, but that's kind of how I feel about basically all the characters in this book. But they take actions, and then they logical actions. That's the main thing, and they all have schemes and plots and everything. But actually trying to relate to them is like almost impossible because they're just so different to you, and you don't have anything in common with them, and you don't understand why. Like their emotions don't necessarily really make sense. Their logic makes sense, and that's one thing we'll talk about when we talk about the strengths of this book. Their logic makes sense, but their emotions just don't. And it's just like the obvious example. I said spoiler free. Spoiler coming up in 3, 2, 1. The obvious example is when Paul's son just dies at the end. And he's like, "Oh, that's sad," and you're like, "Bro, like." And I understand that in the logic of the story, it makes sense. He's some crazy Messiah dude, and he's like so far above all of this stuff, and um, sort of like Bran in the end of the Game of Thrones TV show, where he's like such a big brain guy that it just like emotions don't even register anymore. But actually trying to engage with it as a story, it just makes it unenjoyable. And I think for me specifically as well, because there's so little happiness or anything in this story, so little humor, that it just I don't know, I just found it grating to read. And I think the other thing is it's long, and big parts of the story are like done off screen. There's a big 3-year cut where Paul sort of becomes like the Giga Chad of the Fremen people and everything, and it's just like it all happens off screen, and you don't see any of it, and you're just told to buy it, and it's sort of like a what's the word? The theme of the story is really interesting as well, because it's just like, oh, if you have the right genetics, then that's all good, and you deserve to be strong. I don't know. I just didn't enjoy it. It's funny. At the start of this video, I said I wasn't sure, and now I am sure. However, after talking a lot of shit about this book, I think it's really important to have a look at the positives, because even though I didn't enjoy it, I can appreciate it. In the sense that, basically, it's just a massive sci-fi epic. Every character is their actions, the logic of them is so well thought out, and there's so many plots within plots and plans within plans, and it is an interesting style where you keep flicking back between people's heads. Often, in the story, even in third-person stories, you're in one person's head during a conversation, but to be in both people's head is real interesting, and you can kind of see the juxtaposition there, where one character's like, yeah, I wonder what he thinks of me. The other character's like, this disgusting bitch, or whatever. You're like, oh shit, clearly that's what they think of him, and you get to be inside everyone's head for the different schemes and stuff. So I think that's an interesting thing, and obviously, it's worth kind of looking at this book in the context of which it was written. This is from 1965, so back in 1965, this would have been some revolutionary stuff. Obviously, lots of things have, I don't want to say been derivative of this, although some I'm sure have, but I have taken inspiration from Dune. So kind of in hindsight, maybe it doesn't seem as strong because you've kind of seen it before. But of course, this is the start. Probably something that people who read Lord of the Rings now probably feel. They're like, oh, I feel like I've read this before. It's like, well, yeah, because everything in the fantasy genre is taken from Lord of the Rings. So I think that's worth keeping in mind, and what I tried to keep in mind while listening to this. But yeah, and I do think it's really worth thinking of the strengths of this. I mean, the world building is absolutely insane. I mean, he's created such a universe, both on the planet of Arrakis, but also the greater universe. The idea of a feudal interstellar society is really interesting, and I think it makes sense. There's no reason why that sort of government doesn't make sense. And I would say that the world building generally makes sense. At least it doesn't kick you out There's no giant world building holes as there might be in, say, something like Star Wars. So I think, yeah, world building wise, like, what's the word? Like, logic wise, style wise, even this book definitely has a whole bunch of strengths. But I just think for me it falls down in the sense that it's just not an enjoyable read. It almost feels like reading like an encyclopedia. Imagine someone wrote like a highly insightful encyclopedia of lots of useful information. It's like, yeah, that's good, but you wouldn't read it for pleasure. But the difference is the encyclopedia would have value intrinsically because you might use it for other things. Whereas in this case, I feel like it doesn't necessarily. It's not necessarily something that you like. You don't need to know about this universe, because it's not your universe. So, like, you wouldn't. I don't know. I feel like it almost feels like I'm missing something because obviously this is such a popular series, and I feel like maybe I'm not missing it because I can kind of understand what people get out of this because it is so epic and it's so. It almost feels a little bit like a grim dark. Grim dark fantasy. It's like a grim dark epic fantasy, but in a sci-fi world, and I can understand what people get out of that. But yeah, I don't know. It just fell flat for me. Like at no point did I relate to any of the one kind of character that I sort of related to. I'm like, oh, this guy seems. And to be fair, I'm sure this is deliberate on the author's part. But the one kind of character that I related to, I was like, this guy seems like a good dude. First of all, step one, and also seems like someone I can get behind. Is Paul's dad, Leto Atreides, and then of course spoilers. He just gets killed, and you're like, oh, okay, never mind, sad. And it just like, I don't know. And then obviously the villains are like over the top evil in a sense, like the Baron Harkonnen or whatever. He's just like turns out he's not just like an evil dickhead to the main characters, but he's also like a rapist as well. And like you're just like, okay, like I don't know. It just, and then just the end of the book as well feels real not contrived, but just like any barriers in front of Paul just kind of fall away towards the end, and the end just ends with him just being like totally in charge, totally like no checks on him. He can do whatever he wants, and like every plan he makes just like perfectly comes to fruition. Which once again, in the logic of the story, is justified because he can see the future and he's got all these powers. So of course his plans he makes are going to succeed. He can see the future, but so that works in the story. But from a enjoyment of a story perspective, having a character like that who just everything they do is just right and works. I don't know. It kind of like it felt to me like it kind of undercut any sort of stakes or anything like that. And it just, I feel like I'm harking on this point, but the final thing that I always just come back to of this book is just the characters are so. I just didn't feel anything for any of them at any point, except for maybe Leto Atreides who died, and I was like, oh well. Like at no point did I feel invested in any of them or care about any of them, which is crazy because it's not that you can't care about characters in a grimdark setting. I think like if you look at the First Law trilogy, for example, and to be fair, I know I'm using the terms incorrectly because grimdark's a fantasy term and this is sci-fi and everything, but I feel like it kind of that's kind of a vibe it has. And yeah, it's like not like you can't care about characters in a grimdark setting. Like the First Law absolutely does that, and you absolutely do care. But this, I don't know, I just didn't, and yeah, it was a bit of a grating read. Or listen, I should say, and yeah, I'm glad to have it finished. I feel like it's if you're going to be someone who's into literature, into books, into fantasy and sci-fi, you have to have read Dune. Like it's not negotiable. It's so seminal. But so I'm glad to have read it. I'm glad to have it done and kind of be able to talk about it with people and understand people's thoughts on it and stuff. But I didn't enjoy it. Yeah, I think this video was helpful for me to because at the start I was like I'm not sure, and now I know. But anyway, thanks for watching if you did, and I'll see you later.